the ranch. In this video, we're going to talk about 10 great vintage ham radios for you to buy. And before I get started, if you don't know what ham radio is, this is not what ham radio is. This is what ham radio is. Or, in the case of this video, this is what ham radio is. This is not a top 10 list, so please don't go to the comment section below and complain that the radios are in the wrong order. This is simply just a list of 10 great vintage ham radios. First up in the list is by the Collins Company, the KWM2. The KWM2 was originally introduced in 1959 and had single sideband CW modes, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands, a CW PEP of 160 watts, and a single sideband PEP of 175 watts. Then we'll look at a couple radios by the Drake Company. First we have the TR4C. The TR4C was originally introduced in 1973. And it had the AM, single sideband, and CW modes, and had the 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands. It had an AM PEP and a CW PEP of 260 watts, and a single sideband PEP of 300 watts. Next up, we have the TR7. This is the only solid-state radio in the list. The TR7 was originally introduced in 1978. And it had the AM, CW, single sideband, and RTTY modes, and had the 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands. It had an AM PEP of 80 watts and a CW and single sideband PEP of 250 watts. Now we'll look at a couple radios from the Swan Electronics Company. First is the Swan 500. The Swan 500 was originally introduced in 1967. And it had the AM, CW, and single sideband modes, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands. It had an AM PEP of 125 watts, a CW PEP of 360 watts, and a single sideband PEP of 520 watts. Next in our Swan list is the Swan 350, also known as the 3Drifty. The Swan 350 was originally introduced in 1965. It had the AM, CW, and single sideband modes, and had 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands, It had an AM PEP of 125 watts, CW PEP of 320 watts, and a single sideband PEP of 400 watts. Next is a radio from the National Company. The NCX-5. The NCX-5 was originally introduced in 1965. And it had AM, CW, and single sideband modes in 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands. It had an AM PEP of 100 watts, a CW PEP of 200 watts, and a single sideband PEP of 200 watts. Next up is a radio from the Heathkit Company. The SB-102. The SB-102 was originally introduced in 1970. And it had the single sideband mode and the CW mode, as well as 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands. It had a CW PEP of 170 watts and a single sideband PEP of 100 watts. And then we have a few radios from the Helicrafters Company. The first one is the SR-150. The SR-150 was originally introduced in 1961. And it had a single sideband and CW mode, an 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters, CW PEP of 150 watts, and a single sideband PEP of 125 watts. Next up is the SR-400A, which is also known as the Cyclone. The Cyclone was originally introduced in 1965. And it has the single sideband mode and the CW mode. And it has 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands in it. A CW PEP of 175 watts and a single sideband PEP of 275 watts. And last but not least is the SR-2000. Also known as the Hurricane. The Hurricane was originally introduced in 1965. And it had the single sideband mode and CW mode, and had 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands in it. It had a CW PEP of 900 watts and the monstrous single sideband PEP of 2000 watts. Okay, we have reached the end of our list. I thank you for watching, spending time here at the ranch with the rest of us watching these videos, and I hope that you please come back.